Today's guest is a real treat. I had the opportunity to meet her last year in Toronto, and let me just describe the setting. Those of you that are the Hogwarts fans, it was like showing up to the most amazing school to learn about all of the science of learning. And I walked in and I was just enchanted by the environment. But the content was even better. And I got to meet Dr. Nidhi Sachdeva. It was amazing. It was just, I get chills when I think about it. It was such a great event. And they're doing it again this year in Toronto. We'll get to that. But thank you for coming, Dr. Nidhi Sachdeva. We are so excited to have you here on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Adrian. And you can absolutely call me Nidhi. It was such a pleasure to meet with you. And what Adrian didn't share is before coming to Toronto, it was a chance sort of Facebook chat in the middle of the night. I was working late, you were working late,
Yes.
Eastern time, Mountain time, and we're chatting. And when you learned about the conference, you were all excited about it and, offering so much of the support to it. And it was just such a pleasure to meet your entire team. I know Heather was there too, and Marilyn was there too. It was just a fantastic, fantastic experience. And I'm really glad that you came because yes, last year's Research Ed conference definitely had a heavy focus on math because I genuinely and truly dearly care about all learning, but math's very dear to me. And I think there's a lot of folks that are working on literacy out there. Not that math's not important, but it sometimes gets a little bit, sidelined by literacy. But numeracy and literacy are both important. And but this year's Research Ed conference is going to be more holistic. We'll cover all sorts of topics. So yes, it's happening again June 6th and 7th in Toronto. So for those who are interested, join us there, and it's going to be more of evidence-informed science and learning, lots of nerdy talk.
Absolutely. Yes. And when you go, make sure to schedule extra time. I really enjoy the city of Toronto. It's beautiful, such good food. Oh, I really enjoyed it. I wish I would have made more time to be there. It was just a great experience. So,
And I think it's a really lovely time also. Like hopefully the weather would be great, but June's a really beautiful time in the city, especially like after all the we were just talking about snow before. All the snow has melted and the flowers are there. It's a lovely spot. And I think it's also in a really beautiful part of the city. So yeah, definitely pack some extra time to come and enjoy the city for what it is.
absolutely. And it was easy to navigate. I didn't have a rental car. I had no problem getting around. It was a great city. So, just a little about Nidhi's background. She's a Canadian science of learning researcher, specializing in evidence-informed learning design, post-secondary education, and ed tech. She teaches online learning and micro learning, which we'll talk a little bit about from a cognitive science perspective at OISE's Department of Curriculum, Teaching and Learning at the University of Toronto. So she's a recognized expert in translating educational research into practice, and she co-authors the globally read Science of Learning newsletter and currently serves as the chair of Research Ed Toronto. So yes, okay, let's dive into it. We're going to talk about a hot topic. It's an idea that's quite pervasive, and even I find myself accidentally referencing it, even though I know it's debunked. Those of you that are listening are like, "Ooh, what is it?" So let's talk about it. We're going to jump in. We're going to talk about the myth of learning styles today. So, Nidhi, what is it? What? Learning styles are a myth? Tell me why. Why are they a myth? What do you know about it?
I will share what I know, and I continue to learn every single day. And I think that's true science and the true research is all about that. You continue to learn and evolve. But I think before I actually talk about learning styles being a myth, what we should maybe just briefly spend a few minutes on is just to understand what is an educational myth, right? So learning styles is
Absolutely.
in many senses like an educational myth, right? Because we're using it in the context of education and learning. So some of the common terms that are used for educational myths like neuromyth or edumyth or of course educational myth, and it's a term that's used to describe a commonly held but inaccurate belief or misconception about education and educational practices, right? So these myths often persist, let's say, due to misunderstandings or misinterpretations or sometimes just simply outdated ideas that have been perpetuated, and they just continue to propagate in sort of the practice, right? Here's some commonly held edu-myths, and people may have heard of them, and this may be a surprise for some that, oh, this was a myth, I had no idea. So things like people are left brain or right brain, a myth. Or when we say we only use 10% of our brains, a myth. A very popular myth called the learning pyramid. And if you see it, it's like a really beautiful sort of pyramid with lots of colors. It's sometimes also called the cone of experience. And it's got these completely fabricated numbers that we learn best when we teach others, about 100%, and we learn 30% from demonstration, and we only learn 10% from reading. So it's kind of like devalue some really important things, or lecture or instruction. It really devalues. So also a myth. As I said, the percentages that you would notice on a learning pyramid are all made up, right? Now, what's the point is that there are actually no studies that in the literature that can validate these beliefs, right? So they're really just beliefs that have been perpetuated over time. So that's sort of one of the things that we need to understand, an educational myth. There's another one that's very recent now. It's like teaching facts is not important. We don't need to teach students facts. Also a myth. Students need to know facts, right? And of course, learning styles, which is a really, really popular belief. And it's been around for a long time, and it kind of helps us feel connected to a certain group and justifies it for ourselves that why this is it. And so, but the truth is, learning styles is also an educational myth. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about learning styles now. So learning style myth is this idea that each of us has this one special way that we can learn best with, right? Like being a visual learner or an auditory learner or a kinesthetic learner. It perhaps comes from the idea that people are all different, and just as they may have different food preferences, they may prefer different foods, they may also prefer different ways of learning. You know how kids may do different things, they organize their stuff different. And so it makes sense that we want to believe that we learn differently. You know, like one prefers pictures while the other prefers words, for example, right? But in many ways, it sounds and even feels logical that there are people who are visual learners, that is, they learn best when information is presented as pictures, diagrams, and charts, while others may be auditory, which means they learn best in a lecture or group discussion or from a podcast. Or there may be reading, writing style, which means they learn best through reading or writing. And there's another popular one called kinesthetic, hands-on learners, and learn best through physical experience, right? So I briefly just explained the very, very popular concept, not even a theory, but like the popular version of learning styles. It's called VARC. So visual, auditory, reading, writing, and kinesthetic of learning styles. Now, there's actually sadly many, many more styles of learning that people believe in. But the truth is that there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever for this. The bigger issue, though, is that those who believe that all learners learn differently also advocate for designing and facilitating instruction that aligns with learners' unique learning styles that don't really exist, right? And if you think about it as a teacher, you've all been in a classroom, for folks who are listening to me or experienced that somehow, or maybe as a parent too. This simply is not possible to design and facilitate instruction aligned with so many different kinds of learning styles. Even with a combination of 4, you have so many permutations and combinations in a classroom. This becomes extremely difficult and highly inefficient way of teaching. It's so challenging to cater to so many needs when you have multiple students, right? So learning styles is a myth. There is no evidence that can prove that it exists. Maybe people have preferences. Maybe I may prefer to read something or watch something over doing the other activity. But there is no evidence that shows that me doing that would make me learn better. So that doesn't apply that in the classroom either, right? So preferences are different than actual style that you should then incorporate in your instructional design.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think it's really important that you pointed out preferences, and debunking all of that. And I think there's a lot of shame around that. And it's normal, I think, to feel that way. And I just want to normalize that I've felt shame around this before, right? And it's because there's no research to back up a belief, and that you have a belief that this must be true. And it gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling that it must be true. But yet there's no research that backs that up. And so your belief is being challenged directly, which can cause you to feel shame, to feel really embarrassed about a belief that you're holding so dear to your heart. And that is something we talked about in Toronto last year together as a group. Help me remember, Nidhi, what was his name? He talked about how difficult it is to change a belief.
Daniel Willingham.
Yes. Okay. So when Daniel was talking about that, I was on the edge of my seat. Yes, it's so difficult to change a belief. Like in my own life, this is a completely separate educational thing. My husband and I disagree about some of the conclusions that research comes to as far as nutrition. And I said to him, what will it take for you to come to my side? And he said, I will not come to your side, right? And I thought, there it is, Daniel's example of belief. We both believe very strongly our way, right? And so it's natural, I think, for us to feel some shame and also resistance to hearing what you're saying and being open to maybe changing it. So I think it's important to talk about, why is it harmful for us to be applying these learning styles to students? Maybe that will help us adjust some of the way we're thinking about it and set aside our beliefs.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second, but I do want to really take a moment to recognize and acknowledge what you just said about shame. And, you know, when I did my teacher training back in the day, I was told learning styles exist, and I believed in it, and it actually felt right. And I was like, yeah, it makes sense, until you learn later, right? Like, and learning is also a matter of privilege, right? Like, it's like I have had the chance to go and do a doctoral degree and pick up books like How Learning Happens, or be at a conference and meet folks like Daniel Willingham and learn from them. But it's nobody's fault that we'd been told a story and sold that story. I'm stealing the title here from Emily Hanford. I shouldn't do that, but you know what I'm trying to say, right?
Yes.
We've been modeled, we've been trained to think a certain way. This is how, as you grow in a society, different social sort of norms become your belief, and that becomes your everyday thing. And learning styles has been one of those. And so I'd say, let's not have any shame in believing, because many of us, almost all of us, have at some point in our life believed it for our own self, and probably said it, oh, I'm a visual learner, I'd rather watch the movie, or I just learned like that, and I need to see your name, how you write it, I need, you know what I'm saying? But what we're really doing is another theory that I will mention later on in the sort of conversation. But shame is normal, but we don't need to feel bad about it. And trust me, many of us have done that as at personal level, as parents, as educators. But it's now not time to just be like, you know what? Just because I believed in something doesn't mean that I need to continue believing it, because the issue with learning styles is that I can't prove to you that it doesn't exist. I can just tell you that, because something that doesn't exist, research can't show you. It's like, I would have to bring a real unicorn. But if I showed you a unicorn, then unicorns exist. But that's the problem in learning styles, that you can't prove a negative. You can only say that I can find evidence for its positive. So that's what's so challenging. Did you know what I'm trying to say? Right?
Totally.
And that's the challenge. So let's not have the shame. Let's have this conversation openly, and let's accept. I literally, in every session I present this topic at, I always say, I have believed in it, and it's okay. And if you believed in it, you don't need to tell me that. It's okay. It feels nice to belong to a category. It feels like all my questions, all my confusions, why I couldn't learn to play the piano, gets answered because I'm not a kinesthetic learner. It feels good to justify it. But truth be told, had I received proper instruction, which, by the way, is very expensive to learn how to play the piano if you have an instructor or whatever. So there's a privilege issue here, rather than me not being able to use my fingers to do that. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think just normalize it. So now you talked about, what are the issues if we did that? Well, some of the obvious things are, it's extremely time consuming, as I mentioned before.
Mhm.
When you try to design and facilitate instruction aligning with different preferences, even forget about learning styles for a second, it's really hard. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that at all. There may be moments where you are supporting a certain group of learners, but your whole class intervention, your whole class instruction should begin with what are some of the things that we already know how learning happens. And we do that as much as possible. Why? Because we've known about some of those practices, for example, retrieval practice, getting students
Yes.
to recall from memory. We've known about that for 100 years. We know that the more we did that for students, for let's say any topic, and of course in math, I'm thinking math facts, or even being able to remember the process to solve a certain question, right? The more we do it, students learn better. So if you follow the preferences, if you follow the learning styles, it's a heavy load on the teacher. And
Yeah.
it's not effective because I can't find evidence that teaching to someone's preferred learning style or learning preference will generate higher learning gains. On the other hand, using research-backed strategies, for example, I mentioned briefly retrieval practice, shows that when you do that, all students learn, but the most beneficial are the ones who are struggling, right? For
Yes.
example.
Yes.
The other piece is that with learning styles is that it tends to go into the direction of labeling our students,
Mhm.
stereotyping our students at a very young age. So you may be following a theory that you were told, and you say, oh, you can't do this because we've identified you on the assessment as a visual learner. So again, off the bat, I can't learn to play the piano, maybe, or uh, I'm a visual learner. Of course, I probably can't do swimming anymore because I can only watch videos of it and just visualize it. So you see what I'm saying? So it
Mhm.
gets into that category of stereotyping, labeling, and future sort of mentality of a learner where skills can be learned. So there's a big danger to it. We are shaping the future academic and professional journey of someone by assigning a label to them. So that's a huge problem, in my opinion. The third problem I would say is that it can lead to social inequities. So for a student who got the label, accepted it, done. For another student, maybe they have the privilege at home whose parents will be like, well, no, I want you to be able to learn to play the violin or try different things in life. They may be able to pay for that. They may be able to do push for that learning. But folks with coming from disadvantaged backgrounds or underserved backgrounds, they may not be able to do that. So it can perpetuate further inequities, right? The last one I would say is that learning styles, kind of this burden stays on top of the teacher sometimes. So let's say when a teacher says, it's not working, so I'm not going to do it. But because we believe in this theory and it's so around, a teacher may feel that everybody's doing it and I'm not doing it, and I may be a bad teacher. So it's kind of like an unnecessary guilt for an amazing educator that you all are because you're not following it. So we need to just really make it normalize that we don't need to teach to a learning style. We need to teach based on what we know works in education because so many large scale studies have shown us that this actually helps all learners, especially our struggling learners. So there's other issues too with learning styles, but I would highlight these as some of the top ones.
Sure. I think those are great ones to point out, and maybe some that we forget about. That it's easy to forget about it, right? And so I'm feeling like people listening to this are like, okay, fine, they're debunked. Then what in the world do I do? Because it was so ingrained in me, right? I went to school in the 90s, and that's what all of my professors were teaching me, and I see it modeled again and again. So what do I do instead? So what's some alternative ideas we can give educators to help students actually learn something?
Okay, so there's lots of great stuff that we can do, and I'll try to pack as much as I can, but I also do believe that working memory limitations are absolutely real, so I don't want to overload
Yes.
people and my listeners here. But what I will also mention is that there'll be definitely resources that we can share at the end,
Sure.
and feel free to pass them on so folks can educate themselves a little bit more. One of the things let's stay to the topic of learning styles for a second, before we go into the other research-backed sort of strategies that we can apply in the classroom. Let's try to understand a theory that actually explains why sort of that visual, I need to see the name written to be able to memorize how you say it and what the spelling is and to be able to remember the name. Let's try to understand what's happening there. So there is this really amazing theory called dual coding theory, right? That can actually explain not learning styles, but explain why we don't need to worry about learning styles, because there is an explanation why the visual and the text kind of matters to us. Okay, so let me first talk about dual coding theory, because I think it's really, really important. And I have a video on it as well. I put it in the resources in the document that you shared.
We'll make sure to link it up.
Yeah, please do that. So dual coding theory is not new. We've known about it since 1971, and I'd like to mention it was developed by a Canadian psychologist, Dr. Alan Pavio. Dual coding theory explains how our brain stores and recalls information. So it's a really powerful idea, how it stores and recalls, right? So we're doing both those things at the same time sometimes, because what's the point of having knowledge in our long-term memory if you can't recall it, right? So, but there's something that the brain does, and dual coding theory can help us understand that. What it assumes is that there are two cognitive subsystems of the brain. One system or one channel that that is processing verbal objects like language or text, and they identified that channel as logogens. That channel is working in our brain and understanding text-based knowledge, right, or information. The other one is there to process everything that's nonverbal. So it includes usually imagery, right? And that channel is called imagens. So think about logogens as one channel working in our brain and imagens as the other channel. One is processing everything that's related to text, words that you're reading, language that you're hearing from someone else. And the other one is imagens, that's imagery. Sometimes it's also like smells and other things that are part of the imagens, anything that's nonverbal. Now, what's amazing about these two channels is that they can actually function independently at the same time, and they constantly interact with each other. So when I say the word apple, I'm saying the word apple so you can imagine A-P-P-L-E, but you also see an apple in your head because you know that. So your brain has stored the two words together, but it's also remembering them together. So the logogens channel and the imagens channels can actually work simultaneously, and they don't disrupt the processing. So that's why text and visuals, when they're presented together, feels good to the human brain. They actually have an additive effect on learning.
Yeah.
So what's so great about dual coding theory is that humans are capable of receiving information from both visual and verbal channels simultaneously. And this exactly has huge implications of how we design instruction and how we facilitate instruction in classroom or even in online learning, for example, right? What this means is that if designed properly, meaning receiving visual and verbal information simultaneously, you are putting your learner in a success path, right? On the other hand, if instruction is not designed properly, meaning we didn't pay attention to those dual systems, by the way, lots of evidence for dual coding theory, right? If we don't do that, it's possible that we're overloading one channel over the other, and that undermines learning. So if we were to believe in learning styles and we overloaded the visual component for a learner, because that's really happening in their brain, then we're not really doing them any service by giving them information or instruction in their preference or preferred style, whatever that is, right? So you don't want to overload either of those channels, right? So that's sort of what's really important about dual coding theory, is that humans learn better with text and visuals or images. This is the multimedia principle also, by the way. Humans learn better with text and images presented together that match with each other versus text alone or images alone. So dual coding theory. So it's so much better to follow that and so much easier to design instruction for that, because all the students sitting in your classroom will benefit from this idea. So we could do this in so many subjects, of course, languages, but math has huge implications. It has huge implications for math instruction too. We'll talk about that in a moment. So that's something that we could do. We can move away from learning styles, accept that I believed in it, it's all good, but what else can I do? Let me understand what dual coding theory does. And then dual coding theory has really further evolved along with, in combination with cognitive load theory, and developed into cognitive theory of multimedia learning. I mean, Richard Mayer's work is exceptional. Some 14, 15 really powerful principles that can make instructional design sort of work amazing. So of course in classroom and also online instruction. So we can try to sort of tap into that knowledge. And what's amazing is that it's experimented, it's tested, it's replicated, and we know this helps all learners in classroom. So again, there's more strategies that I can talk about, but I chose to specifically speak about dual coding theory here because I think it's a much better answer for learning styles than anything else, I'd say.
I think so too. I think that's perfect. Thank you for pointing out the nuances of that and that's why it feels good.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah, I love that.
You need to see it because your brain is craving for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, so like we're using this at Made for Math in the CRA sequence. And when we're using, it's not a sequence, I'm sorry, framework. We're pairing those things. It's dual coding, right? We're doing the concrete hands-on, but we also have the abstract, the writing part, and we're pairing those things together. And that's the magic. When we do them separately, the students, right, are not getting both of those things and it doesn't feel as good. And so I love that. So what do you know a little bit about the CRA framework that we work with?
I know a little bit actually. So I think the idea is that, you know, you want to begin with like concrete objects. So I'm remembering when my daughter was in grade 1 in the math program that she does. So they were working with the, you know, the stacks of fractions. So really concrete, and she was able to look at things and figure it out and stuff like that. And that made a lot of sense because it's quite complex to make meaning out of it, right? And once she kind of like not mastered but almost mastered and really got that idea, that's when you know the transition to the pictorial representation happened. But it's still, we're tapping into the dual coding aspect of it, you know, the logogens and the numbers are there and there's the pictorial representations, right? And then once students have found their comfort with it, it makes sense to move to the abstract from that point on, right? So you could do that in so many other sort of concepts in math as well, but that's one example that I'm thinking of in terms of CRA. And I think it's really dual coding theory working amazing in that particular example. I don't know if that I explained that well. I'm sure you know more about that specific aspect because you're using that in a classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really great. So I want to talk more about the math side and you've done a lot of work on micro learning. Can we transition into that? Like, let's talk about what it is and how it's beneficial.
Oh, okay. We can talk about micro learning a lot, actually. Yes. So, so micro learning is actually more popularly known as a term, if you really think about it. It's a term that captured my attention when I started doing my doctoral degree. And I had started the program and I wanted to understand, well, lots of people are on their mobile phones and lots of people are also like learning with that. Could we capture it? Could we do something about it? And every time I dug a little bit more deeper in my research in mobile learning, a word popped up, micro learning. I did not know this. And I'm talking right now about 2019. So at that point, this term was relatively new to me. And I'm thinking, what is micro learning? And I'm learning about it, and it in the initial sort of more you know, popular literature, not sort of scholarly literature, it was portrayed as one of those things that we always do in education. It's going to transform education. It's going to transform learning. It's going to revolutionize. It's going to change everything. It's going to fix all the problems. And I always take that with a not a pinch of salt, with a lot of salt. I'm like, no, but what is it? I do want to know. I do want to know. Okay. So I started digging and started learning about it. At the end of the day, and I actually found the person who coined the term. And I emailed the
Ah,
person. Yeah, his name is Dr. Theo Hug. He's a dear friend of mine. He's in Austria. And he told me the whole story that, back in the day in 2002, we moved away a little bit for some certain kind of training that he was developing. And rather than the traditional macro learning or the 3-hour lecture, we just broke it down. And, there was more detail to it. So I'm not getting into those details
sure.
here. That was the idea. So I asked him and he explained it to me. So I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, well, it's really sort of breaking it down. And I said, okay, but what's the science behind it, right? And around this time I also came across Paul Kirshner's and Carl Hendrick's work, that the book that had come out in 2020, How Learning Happens. I have it right here. And I'm attending
Yes.
these seminars and webinars they were doing, and I got the book, and I was working with, you probably met him, Dr. Jim Hewitt, who was one of the organizers as research at Toronto last year. He works at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education with me as well. And so I'm talking to him, and he said, Nidhi, why don't we explore micro learning together if you want? Here's a book. You make some short videos. Isn't micro like something short? That's what it sounds like. And at this point, I still don't know. And I have to add, for people who are listening and watching this, is that me saying in a doctoral degree that I want to research micro learning was not taken with huge amounts of excitement. It's like, really? What is micro learning? Like, it sounds very shallow, and academics don't like shallow stuff, if you
Yeah.
know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I had to fight my way to researching that. But then I got a lot of support eventually. And I'm glad that I did, because it's not that I wanted to say micro learning is amazing. I just wanted to know what it is, and do we have something that we can tap into it and use it in formal higher education? Because the corporate world was singing all about it. Platforms after platforms, programs after programs, conferences. And I'm thinking, well, what is it? I just want to know. So I started doing that. But what I did was I used the book How Learning Happens, and I made what we call micro learning videos. And I've shared the link with you, by the way, for resources. And I made 5 videos. One video was about cognitive load and problem solving. One video was about dual coding theory. The other video was about explicit instruction. One was about depth of processing. And I can't remember the 5th one, but I made it. But anyway, there were 5 videos. And what was interesting is that as I was trying to make these micro learning videos while learning about cognitive load theory, it had a transformative sort of effect on me. And then I said, micro learning is actually nothing other than the idea that you are making learning more accessible for the human brain. And so that's what it is. And I approached Paul Kirshner and I asked him this question. I said, Paul, what do you think about microlearning? He's like, I don't really know what you're saying, but learning is learning is learning. If you design learning aligned with human cognitive architecture, as John Zweller says, then sure, you can call it microlearning if it's smaller and shorter than that. And I thought, that makes a lot of sense. So I do mention this in my doctoral thesis. So I don't actually sit in front of people and say microlearning is a certain unique kind of learning. I think it's just really a good way of learning that aligns with human cognitive architecture. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't actually take components of it and integrate into our learning design. So what I did was I said, we were doing this doctoral program and it was an online course. And I thought, how can I implement some useful components from science of learning? Let's talk about cognitive load theory and space learning. Space learning is when you don't learn everything in one chunk, but you distribute the learning through a certain period of time. So what usually happens is university students, school students, they will study everything the night before, or just in 1 hour or 2 hours, or on a Sunday they'll do it. But that's not a very effective way of long-term learning, right? We want students to interact more regularly and regular intervals. So then, taking that, whatever I learned about micro learning, I created something called micro lesson, a midweek micro lesson. So what I was doing was I was aligning it with cognitive load theory, and I was aligning it with distributed practice, so space learning. And while the students receive their majority of readings on, let's say, Monday, on a Wednesday or a Thursday, I'll send them a content-filled hello, which was I called it the midweek micro lesson. And that really picked up. That picked up in the sense that we noticed students were coming back to the learning environment more frequently, and they were learning more about the content. And then they would recall the information that they learned in the micro lesson months later in a low stakes quiz that we do. So that's really what became out of my doctoral research, midweek micro lesson as a sample and how you can enhance instruction by doing that. But if you really went down to the details of it, Adrian, micro learning for me is just really how learning's supposed to happen, and you align it with instruction. But there's and a lot of it follows actually what we now understand as the principles of explicit instruction that Rosenshine has given us. If you think about it, daily review, you can use micro lessons as a daily review. Or check for understanding, you can use micro lessons as check for understanding. Break down knowledge in smaller chunks, you can use micro lessons to do that. So it's kind of like all those amazing tested principles of instruction that Rosenshine has given us literally on a silver platter. Like, they are so beautifully and simply written. I don't think he could have said it any simpler for us humans to understand. I mean, he was human too, but you know what I'm saying. Micro lessons lend themselves just perfect to be able to do explicit instruction. You look at any of them, ritual practice, boom, you could do quick quizzes, that's a micro lesson. Now the question is, can we call all that micro learning, and is that a problem with it? No, we can call it a micro lesson because it is not that traditional form of learning how we view it as 3-hour lectures or 2-hour lectures, and because it's different than that. And so I think there's this component of micro that came out of it. I do like to remind people that rather than focusing on the micro, focus on the learning, right? It is micro because we're not doing like 2 hours of a video because nobody's going to want to watch it unless it's like a really highly animated, amazing Disney movie or something, right?
Right.
You know, if it's a math video, you know, let's take Khan Academy for a moment. Like short videos, they're following the drawing principle amazingly. They're using the dual coding theory amazing. The content is not already present on the screen. It's a dark screen with green and red text appearing, and it's appearing as your brain is following those numbers. Boom, they're doing that. Yeah, is that micro learning? I'm not sure if Sal Khan was saying I'm creating micro learning back in the day, but he did something that aligned with how learning happens, and it worked so perfectly for learners who couldn't understand probability, let's say, before that, right?
Sure.
What is the greatest common multiple, right? Or factor GCF or LCM and GCF, right? So he did that, and let's call it micro learning. So I think focus should not so much be on micro. Yes, keep it short, but rather than saying, oh, I'm not going to go over 5 minutes because then it's not micro learning, that's the mistake a lot of people do. It's okay if it goes to 6 minutes, but did you manage to keep the cognitive load low? Did you manage to maintain the mental complexity that your learner will experience in that particular lesson low, aligned with what their prior knowledge is, aligned with how you presented the information? Did you give a chance to practice towards the end? Things like that. So that's what micro learning is. And I keep creating those kind of things now because I have understood that really well, and I continue to learn. And I think there is a good case to be made in instruction, especially in math instruction, by the way, language too, of micro lessons, because they are non-threatening, they're non-overwhelming. People can consume them on a device of their choice. I wouldn't say on the go. I know that's a lot of big push on the go learning, on the go learning. Well, you know, it's nice to focus and learn and pay attention to learning.
Sure.
Engagement is different than education. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But that's what micro learning. I know I'm not sure if this is the answer you were expecting, but this was sort of like the gist of the journey that I went through. And a lot of people would think that I might just say micro learning is the best thing ever. I don't say that. I just say it's a really great supplemental thing that you could do in your instruction, and maximize the principles of explicit instruction and use them wrapped up as a micro lesson. Does that make sense?
I love it. Yeah, that makes total sense. And we'll make sure to link up all the resources that you've provided around this so people can see examples of what you're talking about and deep dive a little bit more if they'd like to. I think this has been a fantastic conversation, and to limit cognitive overload, I think we'll wrap it there. But as usual, we like to end with something a little bit funny. Do you want to set up the comic that you sent me? Because I'm going to share my screen. I think it's hilarious.
Yeah. Do you want to do that?
Yeah. Go
ahead. Yeah.
I'll share it. Yeah.
So it's a meme that I saw some months ago, and I thought this would be really funny. So yeah, why don't you share your screen and I can talk a little bit about it.
Okay. Do you see it okay?
Oh, actually, you know what? I was on a different screen. Yes, I do see it. So
okay, great.
It says weapons of math destruction. And the child says, Mom, I can't finish my math homework. We are out of glue. So you get the idea, right? It's like, look, I love art, but call art art. And when math takes the role of, that you can't do your multiplication or your addition equations or your order of operations because you ran out of glue, I think there's a serious problem with what we have done with science and learning so far. And again, I love doing art with the kids as well. And, my kids love to cut paper and do all kinds of things. But if they said that I did math doing that, I think that would not be right. Anyway, so yeah,
I agree. I agree. My kids, when they were in some science classes in the high school, they told me they spent more time cutting and gluing interactive notebooks than they did actually learning. And I thought, that's sad. That is so starkly different from my biology experiences and
oh
chemistry
yeah,
labs, right? We
yeah.
spent time in the lab and we're dissecting things, and it was all very science heavy. And I was sad that that was their science education. It's a bummer.
I mean, we just briefly talked about CRA, right? Like, and I think there's nothing wrong with you getting kids to do some kind of concrete, right? But
Yeah,
at what point do you decide? I think that's a really important nuance thinking that teachers have to do, that you got to move from that concrete. It's okay if you wanted to do it, but if we just stayed at that and then call that math or that science, then we haven't really gone to the abstract. So I had a session yesterday and I did mention something on those lines, and I said, don't get me wrong, the dioramas that kids do are not bad, but ask them 5 months later or next year, well, what do you remember about the Arctic environment? Like, how are the polar bears surviving? If they only remember cotton and the glitter and all the glue that was used and the shoebox that was used, I don't think we have succeeded in teaching them about the Arctic environment if they are looking to become an Arctic environmental something in the future. They need to
absolutely.
be able to recall something and understand the depths of the matter, right? Same goes with math as well, right? So
Yeah,
again, nothing wrong with using glue and paper and doing things with it, but we can't stop there, or at least we can call that science. And I actually remember dissecting a lot as well in school. So yeah, so it's just one of those things that we have to be cautious about that.
absolutely. Absolutely. It was a delight to have you today. Let's
Thank
do
you.
this again sometime.
Anytime. I
Thank you
love the
so
work you're
much.
doing, and I have a lot of respect for all your entire team. It's amazing what you're doing for math, and I know lots of sort of folks like in the world that I roam around in right now, and I really respect everyone, and they all have a lot of respect for you as well. So thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to chat with you. And I hope I haven't offended anybody by saying that, learning style's a myth, but it's all fine. I believed in it too, but so it's all good.
All good.
Get above it together rather than,
That's right.
be be burdened by it.
Absolutely. Now that we know better, we can do better.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you.